presentation on preventing mental health crises in youth. My name is Lois Mahar, and I'm just introducing the presentation, which is going to be given by Allison Payne and Bob Nassauer. Like most other people in NAMI, I got involved with NAMI because I have a family member who has a developmental brain disorder. That happens to be my brother. And back in the day, when we were all young, nobody knew a thing about developmental brain disorders, much less my parents. And Matt was our baby brother. And so by the time he got up to flunking out of college, we were all gone, his siblings, out on our lives. And so we missed what I believe now was his big mental health crisis. Flunking out of school, coming home, and for weeks and weeks just simply playing video games down in the basement by himself. So I'm really looking forward to this presentation because perhaps if we'd been more attuned to Matt as he was growing up and having some difficulties, we could have helped him in ways that we didn't. About 12 years ago, I and my siblings came together to try to help Matt, give him the help we need. And so far now, with my involvement with NAMI, I'm taking the family-to-family course and learning stuff about how to interact with my brother in ways that feel more supportive. But today, Allison and Bob are going to be talking about helping youth avoid mental health crises. Allison is an assistant professor at Lansing Community College, and she's also a state trainer and instructor in 3 of the NAMI signature programs: Parents and Teachers as Allies, Ending the Silence, and Family to Family, the course I'm taking. And Bob is actually formerly an English teacher. I just found out about this, a high school English teacher. And he went and then became a management consultant. And he too is a state trainer in both Parents and Teachers as Allies and in Family to Family. So I'm going to let them now take over and tell you their personal attraction to or involvement in NAMI. So Bob and Allison, take it away.
All right, Lois McHarg, by the way, thank you for that wonderful introduction. She's our newsletter editor, and if you get our newsletter, I don't know if it's, I'm really pleased and impressed and delighted that you are the newsletter editor, so thank you for what you're doing as a volunteer with our organization. My name is Bob Nassauer. My wife and I live in support of our 32-year-old daughter, who was not dealt a good hand in life. She lives with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And to your heartfelt words about attending when they're younger, that's kind of why Allison and I are here. My daughter was co-valedictorian of our high school class, went to DePaul University for 3 days, unfortunately went into psychosis and has not been back to college since. So, her life has been a struggle, and I consider her a hero. She's doing pretty well these days. So we have a very loving and supportive relationship with her. And that's, if there's one message, there's lots of one messages here today, but one of them is that people need a support group. People need a family, a loved one. You cannot do this alone, in my opinion, and that's a big reason why we're here. Do you want to say anything, Dave?
Sure. As well as volunteering and having a bit of a part-time job, I consider this one of my most important jobs, along with being the parent and parenting my now 21-year-old son, who has a dual diagnosis of co-occurring substance use disorder as well as anxiety and depression. And that's, of course, none of us thought we would ever get involved with anything like this before it became part of our family. And my son is doing quite well, but you'll hear my parents' story later as well. So, and we do, you heard Kevin talk about Ending the Silence. Parents and Teachers as Allies is a program that's designed Not so much for parents, but mostly for school personnel who are dealing with students. And we present at professional development days to school personnel. We've presented at colleges. We've presented at, have we done a faith organization? I've done a faith organization with Ending the Silence. And we've done Ending the Silence to several schools as well. It is a new program, and as you heard Kevin say, what I really need is the youth. Because it's a volunteer thing during the day, it's really difficult to get the same youth. Spencer's been great, but we can't use Spencer, we can't abuse Spencer's time too much anymore. So if you know of a youth who might like to get involved, or you yourself, somebody between the ages of 18 and 30 would be great, even older if they look younger, but somebody that can relate to the high school students, and we have some of those. Anyway, I have passed out my card to a few of you, or take my card, talk to your friend's kid, whatever. We have a training coming up November 19th, so I'm still looking for people.
Very good.
So Bob's going to get started.
And, yeah, so there's perhaps one of the ways we brought this 10-week education class called Peer-to-Peer to Washtenaw County. What made a real impression on me was when a certified peer support specialist working for community mental health, and several of them said, that they've been working with people, and then the people said, I never really felt comfortable opening up about my illness until I talked to a peer support specialist. So this notion of witnessing, bearing witness, and revealing, if you will, oneself to a peer is so, so powerful. So that's maybe a long way of saying there's probably nothing more powerful than to have a younger person stand up in front of young people and tell their story. It's just an amazing thing. And Spencer, by the way, and John Gallagher are telling their stories in the afternoon workshop. So as far as seeing a live presentation, Spencer's not here with us today because he's doing his story this afternoon. We encourage questions at any time, by the way. You can just shout them out, raise your hand, whatever. And I think, Lois, did I give you some 3x5 cards?
Actually, they've been passed out, yes.
Perfect. If anyone is uncomfortable, asking their question out loud, just give Lois your 3x5 card and she'll mix them up and preserve your anonymity. Okay, so why does this matter? Kind of self-evident, but it's, the future, lives at stake. And if a student is struggling, it's hard for them to learn and have healthy relationships and have a healthy lifestyle and so on and so forth. So mental health matters. When we do this Parents and Teachers as Allies workshop, we consistently get teachers and some parents coming up, but teachers especially saying, using the word epidemic. So it's really quite amazing that our society is not addressing this more, and schools, I think, are really, we do not go in there and pound on schools. We thank them for what we're all in this together, and schools are doing, as well as they can, but the demand for services far exceeds the capacity to deliver, and there's burnout everywhere in the system. So we're all, like I said, in this together trying to do what we can to help each other. Some statistics, it's about 1 in 5, 20%. On the adult side, it's higher, about 25% of the adult population at some point in their life have a serious brain illness. So if you're a teacher, are there any teachers in the room here? Yeah, it's generally 1 in 5, students are probably struggling with some kind of a mental health condition. Here comes the sad, serious note. 17% of high school students seriously consider completing suicide. We don't use the word commit, completing suicide. 38,000 people, adults nationally, complete suicide. Some really, really, really bad news in Washtenaw County. I serve on the suicide death review panel for Washtenaw County, and this year, over 6 people under the age of 18 have completed suicide. So, epidemic, maybe. And it's really scary. That's within the national norms. It's just amazing. 50% of 18 to 15-year-olds don't receive treatment. That's what really we're here. That's another main message. It's about access to care. The good news is that treatments, despite the fact that we have a ways to go to improve them and so on and so forth, and the diet, they work. But so many young people are not getting the access to for a variety of reasons. Self-denial, parental denial, who knows, so barriers in terms of poverty, and so on and so forth. So again, what we really want to do is acknowledge that schools are somewhat in a unique position. Teachers are good observers, and teachers kind of have it, but we're not saying to teachers, become a diagnostician. We're not saying, oh, we think your child or daughter has bipolar. No, if you notice something out of whack, and Allison will get into that in more detail in a minute, get them some help. Link them to the school contacts and to the doctor, to the general practitioner, family doctor, or whatever. And then the other challenging news is that partly because of the lack of access to care and the complexity of the symptoms. I don't know about you, but one of our PhD level questions is how do you separate out what might be normal storm and stress of adolescence from what might be a prodromal symptom of possible serious brain disease or brain illness. And some children really struggle in high school and then they come out of it, and some children don't. So every kid, every situation is unique and different. Wouldn't it be nice, this is sort of the Monty Python holy grail here, but we have to go upstream on these illnesses. I think everybody agrees with that. There's the early identification of psychosis project going on, so we're really, there are mechanisms in place. We need more and more. But wouldn't it be nice if someday not only can we cure, but also prevent? And when we've kind of done our promotional piece and with like high school principals, I'll never forget one of them say, you should be doing this in elementary schools because by the time we get them, so we'll go to elementary schools. Anyway, so early identification and intervention are essential. The longer someone goes without treatment or help, the more these awful statistics come into play. Some of the risks of not intervening, dropping out of high school, unfortunately, and this is a whole nother workshop, but unfortunately, people become involved with the justice system, the juvenile justice system. 70% of youth who are dealing with the justice system may have some kind of an underlying condition, and then 90%, over 90%. This is a scary statistic, and I guess it's intentional, but 90% of students who complete suicide had some kind of underlying mental health condition. One thing we're going to pound a little bit on suicide because it's so critical and so important, so please take that seriously. The reality, though, is there are things we can do regarding intervening in suicide. About 1 in 10 attempts are completed, but many times young people don't complete, but they're searching for some kind of help or something. So that's where we come in. Let's help these young people. And why is your role? When I say your role, it's the whole community, it's everyone in this room, it's all of us, but teachers in particular, and school counselors, social work, whatever. Spend more time with your students in the school sometimes than when parents do at home. Good at observing, and it can you can change someone's life. It can make a huge difference in someone's life. So. That's why in some states there are more robust school-sited mental health services than in our state. So as an AMI, as an organization, we're advocating for more support for schools to help with this community-wide situation. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison in just a second, but there are kind of, in terms of reaching out and helping, know what the warning signs are, actually do take some appropriate measures in terms of reaching out, providing resources and supports. And that little back table there has a whole bunch of literature in terms of a sheet on community, local mental health resources, what parents can do, what teachers can do in the classroom, managing a youth crisis kind of situation. So there's tons and tons of resources and handouts and websites and so on and so forth out there. I even just learned the other day there's now an app that one can download on their smartphone, a suicide prevention app, which I haven't looked at, but it looks pretty, pretty helpful. Couldn't hurt, I hope. And then, implementing strategies to promote student success and wellness. And what we mean by that is, it kind of saddens me that kids, who want to be in the orchestra can't be in the orchestra. Kids who want to be on the sports team can't be on the sports team. And there certainly are limited resources, reasons for that. But one of the goals here, I think, helping kids through this difficult period of adolescence with the strain on the brain and the developmental strain on the brain, it would be so nice to encourage young people to pursue what is of interest to them and acknowledge that that's one of the ways they can help get through school. And I'll just say one very brief story. I have two daughters. My older daughter played sports in high school. She was a jock, and she said to us one day a couple of years ago, she said, Mom and Dad, my brain may have been spared because she was under peer pressure on her school sports team to not smoke marijuana, not get in trouble and get good grades and stuff like that. And I don't know, but I'm sure she experimented and so on and so forth. But I thought that was a pretty interesting statement. And the unfortunate reality is that for a small percentage of people, smoking marijuana may induce psychosis. So it's scary out there. On that happy
Is it the center button? I haven't used this one.
Is it on?
Is it the
It's
center?
the one on the right.
On the right, okay.
See, yes.
So we're going to go through what are the warning signs that you may see, and while this particular audience may be very familiar with a lot of this information, keep in mind that this is designed for presenting to large audiences of teachers mostly, some of who may have never seen any information before. So we'll just go through it. This is the presentation that we give to the teachers. So what's important first off to notice is that it is the duration of some of these signs that is probably the most critical. Lots of people can have a bad day. Lots of people react poorly when their dog dies, their grandparent dies, which you're going to see quite a bit of in a high school setting or a college setting, but it's the duration. Normal response to a death in the family might be 2 weeks of acting out and being overwhelmed and sad. But if it's going on for a month or two and it seems excessive, then that might be a sign that something else is kicking in there. So changes, I would say, if a teacher or parent notices real changes in their child or student, then that might trigger your question, oh, I wonder if something else is going on. Difficulty concentrating, overly being concerned about their success or lack of success in school. If I fail this exam, that's it. I'm going to fail the whole class. I have to drop out of school. I can't go to school because I'm going to fail this test, which is not reasonable, so may take extra reassuring. Repeated use of alcohol or drugs, of course, a lot of students are doing that, but if they're coming to school smelling of weed, if you notice that you think that they're inebriated at school, they've started doing this in the morning before school, absolutely a cause for concern and perhaps to talk to somebody in the school about that. Missing class frequently. And the problem with stigma, and we've heard a lot about stigma, is that both the children and the parents in a school setting may make up excuses. Oh, he had strep. Oh, it was appendicitis. Something, because what kid wants to go to school and say, well, I just spent a week in the psych ward at the U of M. But with 400 children a year in the psych ward at U of M, most of them there for suicidal ideation, if not an attempt, those kids come from Dexter, Chelsea, Ann Arbor, Saline, Ypsilanti, okay? and some surrounding areas, but there's so much demand for the few beds there that they actually have to go out of this area very frequently. So if you have a student that you know of in your classroom that is out a lot, it may be something more than a purely medical condition in the normal sense of the term, and it may be a mental health issue. I know I, as a parent, was very hesitant when it first started happening to say, well, my son just spent the night in the psych ward, which actually he did one time and was back at school that afternoon applying for the play, and he got in. But it was, it's like the things that go on in our lives as parents and in the lives of students are amazing that we don't know about. So any of these things could be a trigger, a sign that and paying attention as a parent as well as a teacher to some of these things could be an indication that something else is going on. I've taught for 11 years. I know this stuff. And a year ago, I had a student who was an awesome student. She was just an amazing student. She spoke in class. She had stories. She gave a presentation on the national parks and their family. And she hadn't been in school for a while, and I was like, what is going on with her? And my attempts to reach out didn't work until the very last day of school when she emailed me to say, I didn't turn in all my labs because I'm having trouble managing my bipolar. And I had already actually put in the grades and had to do a grade adjustment and let her turn in everything late. So as a prof, I can do that. I can be flexible. I can be nice, which is what I try to tell other profs. But if there is something that is really glaring, if they are drawing something, if they are writing something, if they're posting things on Facebook that do indicate a fascination with death or suicide, then that is totally something to take note of immediately and talk to somebody.
I'd like to interject in that, Alison, if I may, and that is my wife's nephew is the dean of students in a school in South Minneapolis, and he posted on Facebook a few months ago now, but he said that he deals with the discipline issues as the dean of the students, and he said 80% of the discipline challenges that he's facing are initiated and done on social media. And boy, when we say that to the teachers, we get and it's a real challenge of how do you monitor, manage, and handle that, because it almost appears that it may be somewhat out of control.
However, social media is also a really good aid to figuring out what is going on. I know that one child of a parent that was in a support group that I was in found out that her daughter was actually in the act of trying to end her life because of something she put on social media, and another student called the mother and told her. So letting other kids know your phone number is a great idea, and it has saved my son's life actually. So using the social media, and we presented Ending the Silence at Catholic Central last year, and after we presented to 200 students at once. And after the presentation, the counselors met individually with each small group of students. And some students told of other students some of these signs that had been put on social media, and then they could deal with the situation. So it's very, very handy to have that in some ways. But these are some of the things they might say or do. So if indeed something like that does come up, and you're a teacher in the classroom or you've heard about this, asking the question, are you considering suicide, does not put the idea in their head, okay? It is, if a student or young adult is considering suicide, they will probably tell you, and that means, okay, great, now we can work on this together. So reaching out and sharing concerns is, once you have an idea that something is going on with one of the students in your classroom, or the friend of one of your children, is how do you reach out? Do you even know who the school mental health contact is? Is it your child's counselor in terms of selecting classes? I would say that that is probably the best bet, because the school psychologist actually mostly deals with testing of students. They're not a clinical psychologist. So who is it in your school? Maybe your school doesn't have a plan as to who you're supposed to contact. And if that's the case, then after this seminar, I'm sure you'll try to figure out what your plan is in the classroom. Reaching out to the student, actually being there, or reaching out to the parents. So know your school's procedures. When you do reach out to the student, be specific. I noticed that you normally turn in all your work and time, and you haven't turned in any of the assignments for the last week and a half. Is there something going on? I would like to know, I care about you, and this is not your normal behavior, so is there something that we could talk about and share? What not to say, of course, which is some things we've heard from other people in the past. Oh, I won't tell anybody. No, we have to tell somebody. So you can never promise confidentiality. But, you know, I will be discreet, but somebody has to know so that we can keep you safe. And follow up in a day or two. With the students, actually, one of the young men that was a student of mine, and he had a dual diagnosis, although his parents didn't have a clue until he nearly died from heroin 3 times, was that he had had anxiety all the way through, probably since 8th grade. And there had been many signs that had not been captured. And he finally reached out to a teacher in college, actually. He says, I finally got my nerve up, and I reached out to this, it was not a teacher, a counselor at the college, and she didn't do anything. And I said, what did you want her to do? I wanted her to make the phone call for me. I wanted her to take me by the hand to the office of the person to talk to. I really needed that because I didn't know what to do. So he'd made his one contact. And as a teacher, as a parent of knowing other kids, children's friends, children, etc., you may be that one person. And it really can make a difference. Yes?
Can I tell a story? I've never done this one as part of the workshop, so I'm going to take the risk. And if anyone thinks I shouldn't do it, come up to me afterwards and tell me. But one of my favorite authors is David Foster Wallace. And wrote Infinite Jest. He was considered, he was reluctantly, didn't want to be the oracle of his generation. He completed suicide, and I read a book a few months ago called Capture, and the author of the book was granted an interview with David Foster Wallace's parents. And that was described in the beginning of the book, and they were talking about that the author was trying to understand why would somebody who was at the peak of his powers as a writer, was, you know, at the peak of his popularity as a writer, you know, why would somebody choose to complete suicide? And you can think of Robin Williams, perhaps, I don't know, in this kind of similar situation. And the author, you said, the flames. And the mom nodded. And that was the word that, again, David Foster Wallace in his writings was trying to understand. Why did people jump from the World Trade Center at 9/11? And again, people jumped to their death to avoid the flames. And for me, my daughter was diagnosed as chronically suicidal. I don't think she is anymore. But I've always tried to understand what kind of pain is somebody in that they need to complete suicide in order to escape that pain. So, you know, with young people, for me, that I'm not a therapist or a service provider, but as I work with my daughter and others, you know, I think that's something to understand, that for many people that pain is so great. And in David Foster Wallace's case, he had been on a medication, he stopped the medication, he was doing really, really well, and he tried another medication and that didn't work, so then he went back to his first medication and that didn't work. And he felt like nothing was going to help. So.
One other thing I wanted to add in here was, if you do work with youth, normalizing the situation to say, you're not the first student and you won't be the last. I have dealt with many students with similar concerns and situations. There are many students in this school right now who probably feel exactly like you do. So let me try to help you. Because that's one thing that some of these kids think that they are totally alone. And one of my former students from about 5 years ago still gets in touch with me because he trusts me, I guess. And he said his parents never got it. They did not understand it, they don't accept it, so he can't use them. So we're trying to reach out to the parents as well as the teachers. So with the parents, in high school, this may be the first time that any symptoms are showing up. It could be the very beginning. Parents may not have a clue. They probably don't have a clue unless they've had some mental health issues in their family in the past. So they're going to be in denial, they're going to be in shock. So having information about the student to be able to tell them, this is what I have seen. Your child is skipping class, your child is writing about death, your child has mentioned to other students. Having some concrete information to tell them is what is going to make them go, oh, I had no idea. And also giving them hope and telling them that, that there is treatment is going to help with the working with the parents and encouraging them to get professional help. Because the schools can't do it, and we are not suggesting that the schools do it. The schools are not clinicians. We're not expecting schools to try to diagnose or treat. And that has happened. I have heard of some specific teachers, the psychology teacher in one situation, I can't even remember who it was now, but in our stories of presenting, it has happened that teachers have tried to sort of take over this kid and their treatment and everything, and that is certainly not what a teacher should be doing, and it's not what we would encourage in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So step number 3 is
Allison,
provide, yes.
Question.
Oh, sorry.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I was writing it down, I don't know if it was applicable, but I have a child with autism,
Mhm.
so levels of anxiety are expected.
Yes.
And I guess my question for you, not as a parent, because my wife and I try to stay very actively involved,
Mhm.
but outside of those normal, I'm air quoting normal risk factors,
Mhm.
what do we as a society need to be looking for? Because outside of the normal risk factors, I as a parent have no idea what, if the suicidal ideation is there or not.
Right,
How do you
right.
know what is there?
I say keeping an open line with your child and asking them how they feel. If all of a sudden they're not talking anymore, and I would say having a therapist that they trust is very crucial, because they may tell that person something separately from you. So, it's really, really hard to know, but
Because I can only imagine
Yeah.
looking at this through the eyes of a teacher.
right,
I'm looking out at 33 kids.
that's right.
He's got test anxiety, she doesn't, he will,
Right.
she won't.
I would say, and we have some strategies here that are coming up that might answer some
I have a-
questions.
A male response to that, another risk. I'm going to really date myself. Anybody remember Spanky in the game?
Sure.
Oh, yes.
And one of my favorite scenes is, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool mom. And there's some truth to that, honestly, in my marriage. There's some truth to that mom knows. Mom knows. And in our previous deliveries of this, we have Spencer Walls, and his Kathy here, I don't know if Kathy's in the room, and his mom present. And when mom presents in our Parents and Teachers as Allies workshop so far, first thing, I have the picture, she puts up a picture of Spencer.
Bob, you're ruining it for me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just hold that thought, 'cause I stole that idea.
Sorry, I didn't think you caused a crisis between you.
That's okay.
Didn't show up for the rehearsal, I guess.
Yeah. One thing that, again, suggest to the parents that they get the child to talk to somebody else, because another person is trained in asking the right questions. And especially if you have a teenager, actually it was my son, I was going to say especially if it's a teenage boy, they may not tell you, but they may tell somebody else, okay? They may tell a friend, but try to get them to a professional. Knowing who your professional is going to be important. Getting an appointment could take a while. So calling right away and calling around to try to find an appointment. We have some resource sheets for what's available in the Ann Arbor area, as well as, if there's a crisis, to take them to the university hospital, to the psych ER. Absolutely encourage them to do that, to use the resources in the community that are there, which means knowing what is there. So what we do for teachers is we provide them information, local information, as to what the numbers are. I've passed out suicide prevention cards. There's a suicide hotline on that as a parent you could call, as the student you could call. So knowing what the resources are is very, very important, as well as normalizing the need to ask. So what is it that we can do to promote student success? In the classroom, and I still do this in college, I write on the board what we're doing today. Some people need to know what's on the agenda. Even though they have the syllabus, even though they have my schedule, I still write it on the board. Some students need something written down, physically written down. So I have a hard copy. Even though it's online, I provide hard copies of things. So if you have a student that needs something, perhaps you can adjust your whole classroom to that. I have a quite autistic student in my classroom this year. I've had them before, but he's exhibiting a lot of behaviors. He hates group work. He's already stressed out. So I've already said, okay, this thing I normally do as group work, I'm going to do it sort of as group work, but a different way. And I've already modified that because of one student's needs. It stressed him out terribly. I don't want to stress a kid out, because I know that school stress can push a kid over the edge. And that's what a lot of teachers don't know, and that's what a lot of parents don't know, and they need to know. That one assignment, that one exam, that could be it to push a kid over the edge, and we want to avoid that. So having problem-solving skills in the curriculum, actually talking about mental health when you present your curriculum, which I do as a prof. It's a little different for high school teachers, I suppose, but I always tell them, guess what, in my spare time I talk about mental health. I know a little bit about it. If you have mental health issues that you need to take care of or want to share with me, please do. And I give the resource right up front as to if you have exam anxiety, stress, anything coming on, or a past history, please contact blah, blah, blah on campus. Please contact so-and-so in the school. So I say that right up front, normalizing it, destigmatizing it, making it as a normal thing. If you're sick and can't get here, please tell me whether it is because of appendicitis or because of a mental health crisis. I mention it and normalize it all the time. And I think most people do not. Most teachers do not, most colleges do not. But I think it's starting to become part of the conversation. And again, the communication, keeping a record of the behaviors, because if you are dealing with a student whose parents have never figured this out yet, and the student hasn't figured out why they're acting this way yet, then keeping track of what it is that you've noticed is very, very important. Decreasing homework, not focusing so much on homework. What I say is plan for success now, not failure later. Okay? We want to get them through high school. Okay? We don't want to push. You have to get through school with the 4.0. You have to do it in 4 years. Heck, you can take 5 years to do high school if you really want. The schools have to let you do that. If you really want, if your child is so stressed out, your child can actually stay at home and do some online classes. So we encourage the parents to figure out, as well as the teachers, to figure out what is the leeway in the schedule. Do they have to complete all of these credits? What is the bare requirement from the state of Michigan to get a high school diploma? So I'm a big advocate of that. My son takes 2 classes at a time, maybe 3 at Washtenaw Community College. That's all he can handle. That's great. He's finishing. He's getting A's and B's. I don't care if it takes him 10 years, you know. B's and C's get degrees. In my case, a few D's and E's. And I have a master's. So, you know, whatever. Doesn't really matter. My daughter saw my transcripts a while ago and she goes, "Mom, you're a terrible student." Yeah, I didn't care until I got in my master's and I really flourished. I loved it. But undergrad, not so much. I have ADD. Who knew, you know? So promoting resilience and well-being is a huge part of all of this. If there's been a hospital stay, treat it like any other hospital stay, even if you're the parent or the teacher, to decrease the stress, not to stigmatize. Create a safe environment from bullying. Teachers have all had classes in bullying, so they should all know about the bullying. They probably haven't had classes in mental health, but students can get bullied because of mental health, obviously, as well. So keeping an eye on that is
Yeah, it
important.
kind of blows our mind. In some schools that we've gone to, they have procedures for fire drills, They have procedures for bullying, they apologize. When it comes to what if there's a mental health crisis, we don't really know what our routine is. So we encourage, to have a plan for when there's a crisis.
And
it's communicated throughout the school.
even I found this after my son had been in the psych ward for a week. When he was in the psych ward, in extreme psychosis, suicidal ideation, etc., they were bringing him homework. Do you do that for the kids having major surgery on the first day of surgery? I don't think so. And of course, he didn't do any of it. But that's the plan. That plan didn't work for my kid, didn't work for me either. So I had to go in and advocate and try to talk to each and every teacher and say, decrease the stress. But I wasn't even past the stigma of saying, my son just tried to kill himself. So, and it was school stress that sort of put him up to that point. So please decrease the stress. So it's really getting honest in your communication with teachers and encouraging parents to be honest with you so that you can help their child, not to stigmatize them, not to punish them for having been sick. And partnering with the families is really, really crucial. I think for me, it always came from the family trying to partner with the teacher. And I wish more teachers would try to partner with the family. Asking for information. Now, there's HIPAA and FERPA laws that can get in the way, especially if a student is over 18, then it totally messes up things. Unless the student has given permission, you're not even allowed to know anything about your student. So going off to college and students turning 18 is a real stickler for parents as well as for teachers and professors. As to what you can say and what you can't say, and FERPA laws are also fairly strict as well. So know what the laws are. Know that things can be different at home than they are in school. Oh, but she's a top student. She stays, everything she does is perfect. Yes, well, and she's staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning so that she can be perfect, and then she's exhausted, and we're very concerned about this because it's very stress-inducing for her. So as the parent, I let the teachers know probably far more than they needed to know to try to get them to be empathetic. And it nearly got to the point of me screaming and saying, please pay attention to my child. And you'll hear my parent story later because we didn't have another parent for it, so you get to hear me talk again later. But together with the schools working with the teachers and involving the counselors, I think schools can do a good job. I think some schools are better at it than other schools. Some counselors are far better than others, which is why the teachers need training in mental health, which is why they need to hear it first. They need to be empowered and then maybe go to their administrators and say, am I allowed to reduce the amount of work that they have to turn in this class because they're having a mental health issue or a medical issue? A lot of teachers have never asked that question before, and they don't know. So as the advocate for yourself, your friend, your child, finding those things out and asking the question is very important. So I think it's really, really important to partner with the families. Families might be totally seeing different things at home than you are seeing at school. Maybe it's the teachers who notice, but it could be the families. But they don't really know what to do with it. So a lot of communication and maybe handing the parent some of the pamphlets that we provide for teachers. We provide a lot of things as to what families can do and what teachers can do to try to help out. Some parents are going to say, well, you're having a rough time with school, then you need to quit band, you need to quit sports. It's probably the worst thing that you could try to make them do. Just let them go to school and do their sports and their fun stuff and forget the other hard stuff, right? That's what they need. They really need a decrease in stress. And I say that as a parent, as a teacher. I think the stress level can impact no matter what the diagnosis is. Increasing school stress is something that these kids don't need. It's stressful enough. So anything we can do to decrease it can be very good. And this is something that we show in our NAMI family-to-family class. It's the stages of reactions. Sometimes it's called the stages of grief in grief counseling. Most of your parents and kids are in stage 1. Crisis, shock, denial. Oh no, it's not mental health. No, he's just having a bad time. No, it's going to go away. Well, chances are it may not go away for quite some time unless you get some treatment. But at that time, the parents, as well as the children, need a lot of support. This is something brand new to them. Their child was on a rise, valedictorian. They were going to be somebody. They were going to have no problems. And then boom, it's an illness that hits out of the blue at any time for no reason. So these parents are in crisis. You can only imagine what might be going on at home. My cousin taught high school and different levels of school for over 20 years. She had no clue when she first started being around my son and I when he was starting to get sick. No clue, because she didn't see those behaviors in schools. Okay? So then as people start to come through it, then they move into advocacy. Obviously, Bob and I are in advocacy right now. But we've been through these stages. And then the other thing to recognize is that even though some parent might have had a diagnosis of an early onset bipolar with their child who might have been diagnosed at age 5 or 6, they can still go back to different catastrophic events, okay? At any time, it switches around. And NAMI can help because we have a lot of programs. We have good information, we have training programs, I see some people in here who've been through our family-to-family class. It's a 12-week class and it's free. We have family support groups. NAMI Basics is a shorter class that we haven't taught for a little bit. NAMI Ending the Silence, which we're trying to get into schools. And of course this one, NAMI Parents and Teachers as Allies. And if you work in a school, and if you know of any school counselor, school teacher, that you think this might be helpful, we need inroads to the schools to get this program out there.
Yeah, one that wasn't up there was the new NAMI Peer-to-Peer, which is the 10-week education class for people who live with.
So what we do is, before we end the entire slideshow normally, is when we have our little things. But we're going to, right now, we're going to show you a video, and we are allowed to use videos. We have them as a backup. If our student can't show up that day, people get sick, and you have 200 teachers waiting for you, we can't cancel the whole program just because our student has been sick and can't show up to present. So we do have a backup of videos that we are allowed to use, and Spencer is on one of them. I have had my son talk. I've had students of mine talk. It's very difficult for us to get these young people because they're busy.
Let me check my mail real quick.
No, he sent it to me. Is this it?
Videos, that's it. That's it. And we have a couple of different videos. Some of them have included youth with substance abuse. And the substance use disorder is big. Okay? A lot of students with mental health will use substances to try to calm themselves down. It is a dual diagnosis, co-occurring, certainly for myself and many people I know. NAMI doesn't like us to focus on the substance abuse. Some of the schools, I have spoken at some schools or previewed some things with the schools, and they don't want us to focus on that. Sticking their head in the sand, in my opinion, however. So we do have Spencer's video that we use as well. No, don't.
No, it's timed out.
WISD internet.
Yeah.
So your video is not working?
It'll come out, ask if anybody has a question, and then I'll
Okay.
get it up. Stretch.
And I could do my parent story now too.
If you
Want me to do
that might
Okay.
be good.
So part of our program is we have presenters, usually 2 to work on the videos together, or the PowerPoints together. Then we have a parent story, and then we have a young adult. So we were going to do Spencer first, but I'll do my parent story now. So, hi, I'm Allison Payne, and my son is now 21 years old. He's a very sweet, polite young man. And, see, I stole from Bobby. This is a picture of my son when he was doing fairly well. I believe this was 9th grade. Okay? This is a picture of my son when he was living with severe anxiety and depression. This is his graduation picture from high school. I look at his eyes and I look at that smile, and it is just miles removed from this. He was going through a very difficult time. He was involved in baseball and year-round swimming from the ages of 4 to 14. He always had several good friends. And although he had anxiety about spiders when he was a kid and he had nightmares, we never thought there was anything in the mental health category. Somebody mentioned anxiety once, but never said, we think he might need treatment for this, we might think he might need counseling, we think maybe some medications would help. Nobody said that. He also bit his nails a lot when he was on the swim deck. He was the kid with his hand in his mouth. That's how I could tell who he was, as well as he had quite a tan. And he had a lot of intense stomach aches as a kid, which I didn't know is a distinct sign of anxiety. Nobody told me that. We had him at the ER at the U of M. They thought he had appendicitis. His pain was so bad. None of the docs in the ER seemed to know that this could be a sign of anxiety. So, anyway. In elementary school, he had an IEP for speech therapy, and he attended speech therapy. And while most folks didn't notice a thing, he was bullied terribly when he was on the high school swim team because of his speech, which was apparently a little bit slow. He started to exhibit extreme anger, screaming and sobbing in the car on the way home from swim meets, but he wouldn't tell us why. Also, the IEP had not followed him to high school, although I was concerned about his frustration with large reading assignments or projects, which seemed to cause him great anxiety. But the teachers didn't listen to me, and he had not been diagnosed with anxiety. I wish he had. He was getting B's and C's, and therefore he didn't attract the attention of most teachers until he became suicidal at age 15 in 10th grade. He was having very intense temper tantrums at home, and finally one night, after having huge outbursts of anxiety and suicidal ideation, we took him to the psych ER, and he spent a week in the hospital. A diagnosis of depression and finally anxiety helped us understand some of his physical manifestations. According to my son, he'd been depressed since age 12. We had absolutely no idea that it was anything besides night terrors and a nail-biting habit. Nobody had ever suggested any other treatments. Desperate to decrease his school anxiety, I called the head of special ed from my car after a visit to him when he was hospitalized. I'm pretty sure I lost all control. I definitely remember sobbing and screaming and probably swearing quite a bit, and begged the schools to let him into the resource classroom, even if he didn't have the IEP anymore, which I had begged them not to take away, because his speech therapy had been successful. I'm so thankful that the school agreed. I don't think she had much of a chance, much of a choice. Quite frankly, I think she was maybe afraid of me. My son's relief was huge. When I told him that he could be in the resource room at high school, I could see him. They're going to help you do your homework during school. It's like a class. It'll be fine. However, while he was in the hospital, I already told you this, he was still expected to do homework, unlike some other children with serious medical conditions that elicit empathy from teachers and students alike. Homework and school stress were partially responsible for his condition, so I never understood why homework would be expected, and of course he barely touched his work. I really wish the schools would understand that schoolwork is the last thing some of these kids need to worry about while they're in crisis. However, trying to work with the school for his return was incredibly anxiety-provoking for me because the school psychologists didn't know how to help us. I was not aware that school psychologists are usually, some are, but are usually not clinical psychologists, and wish that the schools had an action plan for dealing with this type of situation without requiring parents to disclose all of your child's medical details to every teacher. When my son returned to school, I requested that his IEP be reinitiated, and using information from several psych evaluations, it was granted, finally. It was not easy. He had resource rooms, a credit class, was given extra time on tests, and teachers responded to my email questions about homework and due dates. However, during the winter of 10th grade, we were so concerned that we couldn't keep him alive at home due to his level of running away, anger, and sheer despair about his life that we sent him to a private therapeutic school in Utah. Now with mental health parity laws, hopefully other parents will no longer have to, hopefully other parents will have access to inpatient treatment for their children so that they don't have to resort to this huge expense. My son did manage to do well in online classes at his school, and his intense rages calmed down. Back at school for 11th grade, his two best friends immediately ditched him, and he was really quite miserable. However, the resource room teacher was very empathetic and helpful, and the guidance counselor picked out classes with certain teachers that would be a better fit for him. I communicated nearly daily with them, some of whom responded, and most of whom who didn't. I feel that some teachers really didn't get it because his grades were okay. Years later, a teacher told me, yeah, he had moments of absolute brilliance, but then I would wonder what the heck was going on. Why didn't you tell that to me? Why didn't you talk to my son? That insight might have been helpful in communicating with the schools to try to get more help. My husband and I did enroll him in a DBT, dialectic behavior therapy class, and I started a parent support group shortly thereafter. Sharing information openly and honestly between parents in the same situation was invaluable. Until that point, we were terrified, confused, and feeling totally inadequate as parents. I took a year off work to spend time fighting with insurance and researching local resources, and indeed, that was when I found NAMI. A diagnosis of inattentive ADD was suggested to my son when he was in 11th grade, and because of the stigma attached to it, he ran out of the clinician's office and down the road yelling, "I do not have ADD," and refused to take medication. He still does not accept that diagnosis. However, he also got involved in drama at school during that time, and it boosted his self-esteem immediately. I remember he actually laughed and interacted with the kids. And when your kid hasn't laughed for a few years, it's pretty cool to hear him laughing. He also had some amazing teachers in 12th grade. We did send him to a private school for 12th grade also, who allowed him to do some history and biology projects using video, which was his passion at the time. And their ongoing encouragement and praise helped his mood immensely. He managed to graduate with a decent GPA, a very good ACT score with no studying, and he went off to college. Unfortunately, the access to marijuana proved to be his downfall. His co-occurring major depressive disorder combined with substance abuse required 2 medical withdrawals from 2 different colleges, and I have actually written a guide on that for parents. 2 more stays in the psych ward for suicidal ideation, and several weeks spent living on the streets of Ann Arbor. He was then arrested for smoking weed in a parked car, but instead of jail time, was allowed to attend inpatient treatment instead. Again, thanks to having a good lawyer, documentation, and a mom who's a badass, nasty woman, because I beat Blue Care Network, and I won. He's now at home, I wrote this a little bit ago, but he did 6 weeks at the DBT inpatient center. He's been sort of clean. I wouldn't say he's been totally clean for nearly 2 years. He'll be off probation in January. I'm a little nervous about that. So getting arrested was a really good thing. But he has had several jobs since then. He's gotten his self-esteem up. He's working right now. He's going to Washtenaw Community College, 2 classes at a time, 6 credits at a time. He's totally fine. And he's working. He gets up and goes to work at 6 o'clock in the morning sometimes, which is amazing. There is hope. He has a supportive family. We have changed how we interact with him. We no longer try to shout it out. That doesn't work. And things are looking up. There is success. I think it's in accepting certain limitations and not accepting others. Just because he has some mental health concerns doesn't mean he's not smart, doesn't mean he's not a nice kid, doesn't mean he can't do well in life. So that's the parent story. Hopefully this will work.
Thank you, Allison, for telling that. I have a couple of questions for you. Well, I'm multitasking here, so hang on a second. You want to do the Spencer, or just do questions?
Oh, we could just do questions.
Yeah.
How many people in here have questions or things that they'd like to talk about? There's a few.
Oh, good.
Okay, let's do
So,
questions.
and before we do that, I do have a couple questions too. Question number one is, how do you know, how would you, let's summarize a little bit. How would you know if something might be amiss with a young student? How would you summarize the early warning signs?
A lack of interest in what they enjoy doing.
Or just an inability to, or no ability to focus, or
It sounds like the key thing was changes in behavior over a long period.
Severity and duration, those are the two. Thank you very much for everybody. Yeah, if you notice something, if you know your child or you know the student, you kind of know the baseline. If there's something in terms over a couple of weeks or longer, severity, more intense than the baseline and longer duration than the baseline. So that we wanted to summarize that. Second summary question. Okay, let's say you have a situation where, okay, severity and duration, I think we're dealing with a young child or a child who needs some help. What do you do first?
That's the question.
Ask the questions.
Tell them that you love them.
Oh,
As a parent, I
Yeah.
agree.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, wonderful. And
Another
another,
thoughts on committing suicide?
say again, say it
Do you have
louder.
thoughts on committing suicide or
Yeah, Are
something?
you considering killing yourself? Yeah. Thank you. That's really good. Another story on that is down in Manchester. Unfortunately, a student, we were doing Parents and Teachers Allies about a few months after we did their first workshop. A student completed suicide. They asked us to come back there. The superintendent, I don't know if you were part of that.
No, I wasn't there.
Came up to me, I guess, before the session. I just wanted you to know, the father and the younger brother of the student is in the audience. And wow, and when we came to the part of the presentation, what do you do if you suspect that your child needs some help? What should you do? And the father raised his hand and said, start with the GP, talk to the family physician. And to me, that was an incredibly powerful moment especially for me and I think for other people, because he was saying to this community, it can happen to anybody, any place, any time. And you got to start somewhere, and start with that. So he knew, he knew, and yet, lost it.
Our instructor at WCC over I'm in mental health right now, she pointed something out to me that is obvious, but I didn't ever put together, and that's, we're talking about these risk factors. Look for that person that suddenly doesn't exhibit that anymore.
Mhm.
And she was talking about how they're at ease, the plan is in place, everything's, I mean, that was a very
Mhm.
moment,
Mhm.
sitting in class listening to a lecture, because I had a close friend that completed suicide, and
Mhm.
I remember that part,
Right.
of course, after the fact.
And recently, a young man in Ann Arbor, who had graduated out of Skyline, I believe, started taking heroin. And my friend's daughter found out the day before he died. He finally told her. At the funeral, his parents were angry and upset, but I think they thought that people knew earlier, but they were exhorting, or I think that's the word, asking, pleading that in the future, if anybody knows anything, tell people. Tell somebody, tell the parents, tell the teacher, tell the social worker, tell somebody. And I think that telling somebody, and especially if it's a suicidal thing or something like heroin, which could lead to
Or
immediate death.
fentanyl, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing
Yeah.
it right, or carfenol,
Right.
that's 90
Yeah.
times more powerful than heroin. I don't know about the Prince real story, but it's possible there are people who are taking these drugs, not understanding the dosage, and it's killing them.
So, I have a question here. Now that my son is 18, how can I get information and input into his treatment? The psychiatrist is freezing me out. Well, what I suggest doing always, you can always email. This is what I've seen at home. Even if you think the psychiatrist is freezing you out, they will probably open it and read it. Okay? I have sent hundreds of emails. I have sent long emails. I have sent short emails to my son's psychiatrist. And until they're 18, you can do that. With HIPAA, at 18, the minute they turn 18, nobody has to tell you anything. You can take your child the eve of their 18th birthday to the psych ward, and if they're 18 that day, through HIPAA laws, they will tell you nothing. I've had my son transported to another place, had to beg, repeatedly harass them to tell me any information to figure out where my son was. So it's very, very difficult. Yes?
So I am a psychiatrist who has some patients where they do not want their family to be involved, and so
Right.
they haven't signed any documentation that says I'm allowed to say anything.
Right.
But everybody can tell me anything they want all the time.
Right.
And I'm not allowed to say that
Mhm.
I am taking care of that person, but if you can find me, you can send me anything you want to. And we absolutely read it. So
Yeah.
I apologize for some people probably do sometimes feel frozen out because legally I have to.
It is,
abide by
it's
certain
legal.
laws.
And I think there's some work to change some of that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a bill
Legislative.
pending in Congress, and we know how successful Congress is in passing bills, but.
It is very
It is that,
difficult.
it's the HIPAA laws, there's hope that they will change so that if the service provider feels it's in the best interest of the patient, they can reveal. But,
And the other thing is, like the doctor said, there are forms that can be filled out when your child is in a good place, which I did with my son, to say, so that I can call and make you an appointment, because I swear my 21-year-old daughter with no issues still can't make a phone call, or couldn't when she was 21 to the doctor. So that I can make appointments for you, so that I can call in your meds, so that I can do this, I need your permission. Could you please sign this document and put a date on ending it 5 years out, or something like that. Then you have that document, and you keep that document, and you take it with you wherever you have to, so that you and make copies of it to give to doctors. The same is also true with FERPA requirements. When a student goes off to college, if you have a student going off to college, I would say get those documents signed before they go, so that if they are sick, that you can deal with whatever's happening at school. There's a bunch of different things that you may have to sign at a college, so find out what they are. But also, the other thing that I would say, and this is just me, this is not the NAMI way, if you don't like the child psychiatrist, you're paying the bills, it's your child, you can change psychiatrists. You can lie to your kid, and you can tell them, you know what, our insurance doesn't take that psychiatrist anymore, and that may be true as well. And maybe we need to switch. Should we try to find somebody different? There's many, many people that I know have been through 3 or 4 different people. Now, mind you, finding a child psychiatrist is very, very difficult. So once you get into one, that could be the thing. However, many psychiatrists, in my opinion, and they may not be trained in clinical social work type counseling. So that may not be their expertise, in which case you may want to add on a social worker or a counselor to the whole treatment spectrum. So, and that has worked much better. I'm one of the lucky ones, my son's psychiatrist does do counseling and he likes him and it's fabulous. But that's a rare situation in my dealings with many parents and teachers. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there any good way of just, telling other parents if you've just found some, activity that doesn't like substance abuse?
Yes, very directly. And it's, our children have been together and the question was, how do you tell other parents, or what do you do when you know there's substance abuse happening? Which is all very tricky, and some parents may write you off. Not my Johnny, no, my Johnny's perfect. However, I think it's always in everybody's best interest to know what's going on. So I have always been direct. I thought you were also going to ask about the mental health thing, but one thing in all of this is the stigma, and I always say, my son has been very sick. Well, your kid was doing it. My son has been very sick. Oh, it immediately sets up an empathetic response. Oh, what's the problem? He's been diagnosed with severe depression and co-occurring substance use disorder, and it is a concern to us. So putting it in that light, that you are concerned, not that you're going to penalize and call the cops, but that you have great concern because this in particular could not be helpful for your daughter. who has some medical issues. Hey, what can I say? I always say honesty is the best way to go. But in all of this, I'm certainly much more open now than I was 5 years ago. I wish 5 years ago I had been as open with my son's teachers, certainly the school administrators and everybody else, because you are your son's best advocate. You care more for your child than anybody else does. So, one thing, because we can't show Spencer's video, when the students talk, they do come through a training with us, because the focus is, and the focus of my story was not to say how ticked off I was with the schools. The focus is to say, hey, this head of special ed helped me. This resource room teacher helped me, and they helped my son. They really did. Some of the people that he loves the most and cares the most about in his life are some of the teachers who have helped him. So there's hope, and those people can be very, very important. And in Spencer's video, he also talks about the work that it took for him to get over his anxiety to be successful. And he ended up at the University of Michigan. When he was there, he found it overwhelming, and he did not finish, but he's very successful. He's busy working and flipping houses, as he says, and whatnot. So our message is one of hope. Our message is one of, yes, these children can be ill, but if everybody works together, it takes a village to help them, they can be more than successful. Finishing school, staying alive is often the biggest success, I think it is. So anyway, I encourage you, after hearing about the program, to talk to schools, try to get it into the schools, call us, and we have business cards if you need it. Yes?
There is one comment back there about the David Foster Wallace story.
Oh, sorry, yes, I forgot that one. I have something to add to the story about David Foster Wallace based on the New Yorker article. Would somebody like to? Yes.
That was mine, and the New Yorker did a huge article about David Foster Wallace, which is longer than anything I've seen them do. And then the amazing thing is they reprinted it the next month. I have never seen them do that.
Wow.
And in that article, they said he was doing very well on his medicine, and he felt he could not reach the next level of his writing because of the medicine. The usual story of, artists have it. In fact, I'm a writer, and sometimes I feel like my medicine is not allowing me to reach this one very creative state that I remember when I'm hypomanic. So I have to just kind of say, well, it's better that I stay alive than write anything. So along with that, I have a friend whose son killed himself, and she was checking the level of pills in his bottle, and it was going down, so she felt like he was doing all right. But after he killed himself, she found all the pills at the side of his mattress. So he basically knew she was, taking stock of his pill bottle, and he was taking each pill and putting it.
I'm a strong advocate, I didn't mention a few things here, of locking up pills in pill bottles, because students do use those for overdose, but also of a weekly pill container kept in the kitchen. Then you can hopefully see them taking it with their breakfast, and you can watch it day by day. So weekly pill containers, I think, are huge for these students who've never taken a medication before on an ongoing basis, perhaps. Just a little hint that worked in our family. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming, and good luck with all your answers.